Welcome to our explanatory talking about post-colonial literature. I'm presenting this comprehensive course that will take us through one of the most transformative movements in world literature. Let me walk you through what we will cover. We will begin with an introduction to post-colonial literature and theory, exploring what these terms actually mean. We will then examine key concepts that are essential for understanding this field. Terms like hybridity, mimicry, and otherness that you'll hear throughout our discussion. The historical context is crucial, so we will spend time understanding colonialism itself and what came after. We will look at the major themes that run through post-colonial works, question of identity, resistance, language, and power. We will also examine the distinctive characteristics that make postcolonial writing unique in its approach and style. Throughout this course, we'll study key writers, figures like Tuna, H.B., and Jane Rice, and we'll do deep case studies of their major works. We will also explore the influential theorists who gave us the tools to analyze these texts. Finally, we will connect everything to contemporary issues, showing why this literature still matters today. Now let's go to the course outline. Introduction to Postcolonial Literature, what a postcolonial theory, key concepts in postcolonial literature, historical concepts, colonialism and its aftermath, major themes in postcolonial literature, characteristics of postcolonial writing, key postcolonial writers and their works, influential postcolonial theorists, applying postcolonial theory, reading strategies, case study, Things Fall Apart by Chunna Achebe, case study Wild Sargasso Sea by Jane Rice, Language of Identity in Postcolonial Literature, Postcolonial Literature and Contemporary Issues, Challenges and Critics of Postcolonial Theory, Conclusion Embracing Postcolonial Voices. Now let's move to learning objectives. Understand the historical and cultural context of postcolonial literature, identify key themes and concerns in postcolonial literature works, analyze the impact of colonialism on language, identity, and culture, explore major postcolonial theorists and their contributions. Now let's move to the learning outcomes, and they are define postcolonial literature and theory with clarity and precision. Recognize and explain major themes such as identity, otherness, and resistance. Discuss the significance of language and hybridity in post-colonial texts. Identify key post-colonial writers and their groundbreaking works. Apply post-colonial concepts to analyze literature texts critically. Reflect on the ongoing relevance of post-colonial studies in contemporary culture. Now let's move to Introduction to Post-Colonial Literature. Post-colonial literature represents one of the most dynamic and transformative movements in world literature. It emerged from countries formerly colonized by European empires, spanning vast geographical regions, including South Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and Australia. This literature is not merely about documenting the colonial experience, it's about reclaiming voice, identity, and historical narrative from the grip of imperial power. Colonial powers did not just rule politically, they controlled narrative, they wrote the histories, they defined what was civilized and what was savages. Post-colonial literature is the act of taking that power back. Now let's move to um, the second slide introduction, the term post-colonial itself is complex and contested. It doesn't simply mean after colonialism in a conclusion sense, but rather encompasses the ongoing cultural, political, and psychological legacies of colonial role. These works address the profound effects on our of colonization and decolonization, exploring how colonial counters fundamentally shaped both colonizer and colonized societies. This is important. Colonialism changed everyone involved. Didn't just affect them over there. It shaped European societies too, though in very different ways. The wealth extracted from colonies built every European city. The sense of racial superiority damaged European psychology. These connections persist today. Now let's move to writing back, reclaiming identity, ethical tools. So post-colonial literature often writes back to colonial narratives, challenging the representations and stereotypes imposed by colonial powers and asserting the dignity and the complexity of colonized peoples. Then, reclaiming identity, these works reclaim identity and history, offering counter narratives that counter the experiences, perspectives, and the voices of those who were marginalized by colonial discourse. Now, let's move to ethical tools. Post colonial theory provides critical tools to analyze power dynamics between colonizer and the colonized, examining how these relationships continue to shape contemporary global politics and culture. Why are some countries rich and others poor? Why do certain languages dominate global communication? Post-colonial theory helps us understand these questions through the lens of historical colonial relationship. Now, let's move to the question, what a post-colonial theory? Post-colonial theory emerged as a critical framework in the 1970s, profoundly influenced by Edward Said's groundbreaking work, Orientalism, 1978. This theoretical approach examines how colonial powers constructed knowledge systems, cultural representations, and academic discourse that serve to justify and perpetuate their domination over colonized peoples. Said demonstrated how the Orient was not a neutral geographical concept, but rather a Western construction that served imperial interests. When European scholars studied the Orient, they weren't objectively describing reality. They were creating an image of the East as mysterious, exotic, backward, despotic, and sensual. Everything the rational, progressive, civilized was supposedly was not. This image justified colonial rule if Eastern peoples were incapable of everything themselves. Rational, then Western role was actually helping them. Now let's move to the second slide. The theory goes beyond simply documenting colonial injustice. It integrates the very foundations of knowledge production in Western academia. It asks crucial questions: why gets to speak? Whose stories are told? Whose perspectives are valued as objective or universal? By exposing the power dynamics embedded in language, representation, and the cultural protection. Postcolonial theory seeks to dismantle the hierarchies, the position Western knowledge as superior and the non-Western knowledge as inferior, primitive, or exotic. This dismantling is ongoing work. It means questioning what we think we know, examining how we came to know it, and recognizing those interests that knowledge serves. Constructed knowledge, core concepts, marginalized voices. Constructed knowledge examines how colonial powers constructed knowledge to justify domination. Core concepts focuses on others or otherness, mimicry, hybridity, and subalternity. Marginalized voices seeks to give voice to marginalized people and challenge Eurocentric narratives. It creates a space for perspectives that have been silenced or dismissed. It validates knowledge systems that colonialism tried to erase. It takes seriously the experiences and the insights of people who have been treated as objects of study rather than producers of knowledge. Now let's go to the evolution of postcolonial theory. So postcolonial theory has evolved significantly since its inception, incorporating insights from feminism, Marxism, psychoanalysis, and the cultural studies. It provides scholars and readers with sophisticated analytical tools to understand how colonial legacies persist in contemporary globalized culture, from media representations to economic structures to educational curricula. That still center Western knowledge. Now let's go to the key concepts introduction. The key concepts in post-colonial literature. Understanding postcolonial literature requires familiarity with several foundational concepts that recur throughout these works. These theoretical tools give us analyze and complex relationships between power, identity, culture, and resistance in postcolonial concepts. As we go through these concepts, try to think of examples from literature, film, or current events where you have seen these dynamics at play. Now let's move to the otherness, hybridity, mimicry. Otherness, the construction of colonized peoples as fundamentally different and refer to Europeans. The process of othering creates binary positions, civilized, savage, rational, emotional, advanced, primitive, that justified colonial domination and continue to influence contemporary stereotypes. Hybridity, the blending and the creative tension between colonizer and the colonized cultures. Hybridity challenges essential notions of pure culture identity, revealing how colonial encounters produced new complex culture form that cannot be reduced to either native or colonial categories. Mimicry, the imitation of the colonizer culture, language, and behavior by the colonized, often with profound ambivalence. Homi Bhabha argued that mimicry is almost the same but not quite, creating a space of superversion where colonial authority can be questioned and destabilized. Colonial powers wanted colonized people to adopt European culture, to speak European languages, wear European uh, clothes, adopt European manners. But this created a problem. If colonized peoples became just like Europeans, what justified keeping them subordinate? So mimicry was always incomplete, always not quite right, and this created opportunities for mimicry and supervision. Now let's go to subaltern and writing back. A term borrowed from Antonio Gramsci, referring to marginalized groups whose voices are systematically suppressed by dominant power creatures. Gayatri Spivak's famous essay asks whether the subordinate can speak within systems designed to silence them. Writing back literary works that consciously respond to and challenge colonial discourse. These texts write conical Western narratives from post-colonial perspectives, asserting the agency and the complexity of colonized peoples and their descendants. For example, when Jane writes Wild or Wide Sargasso Sea, she's writing back to Charlotte's Bronte Jane Eyre, taking a character Bronte dismissed as a monstrous mad woman and given her humanity, history, and advice. When Tuna actually writes things fall apart, he is writing back to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and the case of European literature that portrayed Africans as savage and primitive. Writing back is an act of literary resistance and reclamation. Now let's go to the historical context introduction, historical context, colonialism and its aftermath. To fully appreciate post-colonial literature, we must understand the historical forces that shaped it, colonialism as a system of post-colonial economic and cultural control, dominated the global relations from the 15th to the 20th century. European powers, particularly Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands, established empires that spanned the globe, extracting resources, exploiting labor, and imposing their languages, religions, and cultural values on indigenous populations. The scale of this is hard to grasp. By the early 20th century, European powers controlled over 18 or 80% of the world's land surface. Virtually no region escaped their reach, and the effects were devastating. Now let's move to the impact of these empires was devastating and far-reaching. Colonial powers distribute existing political systems, reduce borders without regard for ethnic or cultural boundaries, introduce the cash crop economics that displaced substance farming and implemented educational system designed to produce competent colonial subjects. The psychological and the cultural violence of colonialism was as profound as its psychological brutality, as indigenous people were taught to see their own cultures as inferior and to aspire to European standards of civilization. Imagine being taught that your language is primitive, the religion is superstition, your customs are barbaric, your ancestors were savages. This psychological violence continues to affect people generations after political independence. Now let's move to the timeline, themes, and the characteristics. Timeline of colonialism and decolonization. 15th, 19th centuries, European colonial expansion reaches its peak, establishing empires across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Early mid 20th century, the colonization movements gain momentum with independence struggles intensifying after World War II, 1947 to 1980s. Wave of independence, India, 1947, African nations, 1950s to 1960s, Caribbean nations achieve self-governance. Post-independence era, newly independent nations grapple with colonial legacies, uh, neocolonialism, and the challenge of nation building. Now let's move to the reflection of timeline, post-colonial literature reflects trauma, displacement, and cultural negotiation that followed both colonization and decolonization. These works explore the complex feeling of liberation mixed with loss, the challenge of rebuilding societies fractured by colonial rule, and the ongoing struggle to forge new identities in the wake of empire. Who are we now? And we define it by our pre-colonial past, by the colonial experience, or by some new hybrid identity. Can we ever recover the what was lost, or is that loss permanent? Postcolonial literature grapples with these painful, complex questions. It doesn't offer easy answers, but it explores the lived reality of people navigating these challenges. Now let's go to the major themes introduction. The major themes in postcolonial literature. Postcolonial literature explores a rich tapestry of themes that reflect the complex realities of living the shadows of colonialism. These themes are not merely abstract concepts, but represent lived experience of millions and billions of people navigating the legacies of empire in their daily lives. As we discuss each theme, consider how they might intersect and overlap in actual literary works. Now let's go to the five major themes: identity, self-representation, reclaiming cultural identity from colonial stereotypes and asserting the right to self-definition, revising history, challenging colonial historical narratives, and restoring indigenous perspectives and memories, displacement, diaspora, experience of immigration or migration, exile, alienation, and struggle to belong in multiple places. resistance and liberation, narratives of anti-colonial struggle, empowerment, and the fight for political and cultural freedom, language and power, the projects of linguistic choice, and the creative reshaping of colonial language. So, should post-colonial writers use colonial language like English and French, gaining a wider audiences, but potentially perpetuating linguistic colonialism, or should they write in the indigenous languages, maintaining cultural authenticity, but limitation readership? Many writers creatively transform colonial languages, making them their own. Now let's move to the theme intersections. These themes often intersect and they overlap in post-colonial texts, creating layered, nuanced narratives that resist simple categorization. Writers use these themes to explore how colonialism has shaped not only political and economic structures, but also the most intimate aspects of human experience, family, relationships, personal identity, language, memory, and belonging. The power of postcolonial literature lies in its ability to make visible what colonialism tried to erase, the full humanity, creativity, and resilience of colonized people. Now let's go to the characteristics of post-colonial writing. Post-colonial literature is distinguished by distinctive formal and stylistic characteristics that reflect its political and cultural commitments. These literary strategies are not merely aesthetic choices, but represent deliberate acts of resistance and cultural reclamation. The way postcolonial writers writes is itself political. Now let's move to the indigenous storytelling and language innovation. So, indigenous storytelling, use of indigenous storytelling techniques and oral traditions, incorporating folk tales, myths, and communal narrative structures that breed predates colonial influence, language innovation, experimentation with language, including serialization, code switching, and infusion of indigenous vocabulary and syntax into colonial languages. Using English words but African grammar or inserting untranslated Hindi words into an English text. This innovation transforms colonial language, making them vehicles for expressing colonized experiences and perspectives. Now let's move to reworking European forms and emphasis on place. Postcolonial writers often take European literature forms, the novel, the Bildungsroman, the epic, and reshape them to express local realities and challenge Western literary conventions. This creative appropriation transforms colonial cultural tools into instruments of resistance. Emphasis on place and memory, strong a focus on specific geographical locations, landscapes, and the relationship between people and land. The memory becomes a crucial tool for recovering histories that colonial narratives attempt to suppress or distort. If colonial education taught false histories, memory passed down through families and the communities preserves alternative truths. Now let's move to These characteristics work together to create literature that is formally innovative and politically engaged, but by drawing on indigenous traditions while also engaging critical with the colonial literature forms. Postcolonial writers create new library language capable of expressing the complex realities of postcolonial experience. The result is literature that is both aesthetically sophisticated and deeply connected to specific cultural contexts and political struggles. This literature demands that readers expand their sense of what literature can be, what stories deserve to be told, and whose voices deserve to be heard. When you read post-colonial literature, pay attention not just to what is being said, but now or but how it's being said. The form itself carries meaning. The language choices are political acts. The narrative structure makes arguments about cultural and power. So we'll stop here and we will continue next time, next session tomorrow, inshallah. So until next time, ta for now.